Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. As you may recall, we were joined by Mark from the Section 138 podcast a few weeks ago to give us the inside scoop on the Toronto Blue Jays. Today, we move on to the rebuilding Baltimore Orioles. And to help us out, we're going to be joined by Connor Newcomb. He's the host of the Locked On Orioles podcast, and he also does play-by-play for Johns Hopkins University. He's going to give us the inside scoop on some young players who might be a thorn in the Yankees' side for years to come. So let's bring him on. Hi, Connor. Welcome to the show.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Now, you do play-by-play for Johns Hopkins as well. You have the host of your own podcast, Locked On Orioles, which we'll get into. But just get into yourself as a media person. So I guess you studied journalism and media. So what was your interest to get into that field?
Yeah, I studied journalism at the University of Maryland and covered a lot of different sports down there. Obviously known for its basketball program, but the school does pretty well across the board in sports like soccer, lacrosse, field hockey. So you kind of dip your toe in everything. And was the play-by-play voice of the baseball team while I was there my senior year. And came out of school, worked in minor league baseball for a year. And then, as you said, I've been the play-by-play voice of Johns Hopkins University, Division III athletics, but they do pretty well. And of course, they play Division I in lacrosse. And then I've been hosting the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, for about 13 months now, just over a year. Obviously it was an interesting time to start hosting a baseball podcast because it was 6 months of waiting for a season to start last year. But yeah, it's been cool to cover the Orioles, and hasn't been a lot of winning lately, but it's been fun to host this podcast and at least talk about minor leaguers when the major leaguers aren't quite putting up a lot of wins.
Totally. And I was kind of in the same boat. I think I started my show back in 2016 when the Yankees were kind of in transition period themselves. And it was kind of like starting a year with a kind of like not really great team. But then, there was that fun of some of the young players like Gary Sanchez and Judge coming up, and then sort of seeing some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. That was, of course, 2016 was right at the end of the Orioles kind of having their 5 or 6 year run where they were really competitive and had the most wins in the American League from 2012 to 16. And as they both had something to do with each other. As the Orioles kind of slipped off, the Yankees obviously came back to being the best team in the American League East. And now it's just about how do the Orioles get back to the team they were 7 years ago now when they were able to win a division.
Yeah, and we'll break down some of that coming up. But just you yourself, I mean, as I guess as a kid, did you root for the Orioles, or was this sort of like, or you just drawn to this? Is there like a particular broadcast or something that just like drew you to the not only the team but just to the field that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an Orioles fan my whole life. Grew up just outside of Baltimore. Of course, went to school at the University of Maryland. My parents, my grandparents, all lived in Maryland their whole life, all Orioles fans throughout the family. And obviously a Ravens fan as well, and fans of the teams in Maryland. But baseball had been my top sport, not just as an athlete, but as a fan for my whole life. And so kind of fell in love with the Orioles. And it was tough being a kid and knowing that not only were you rooting for one of the worst teams in baseball, in the early 2000s, but that there wasn't really a path forward for a while. So for the first, good chunk of my life, the Orioles were really bad until I guess high school was when they first made the playoffs for the first time in my life. But I grew up rooting for the Orioles, and always something that's kind of been a big part of my life. And then got the opportunity to host this podcast and talk about them even more than I usually do.
And they can follow you on Twitter. It's Locked On Orioles, and of course, any other areas where people can find you.
Yeah, so at Locked On Orioles on Twitter. Of course, we tweet out our episodes, but we had a nice little thread during the coronavirus shutdown last year where we did a thread of on this day in Orioles history, basically threading every day through what would have been the normal 162 game season with videos of kind of the biggest events that happened on those days, and we've tried to keep that going with just a lot of Orioles videos. I was putting together full old at bats, looking up games from the 80s and the 90s. And it would be, things like Mike Mussina versus Derek Jeter, just 2 minutes of those two battling it out. Of course, when Mussina was still with Baltimore. So there's a lot more content that I put out than just the podcast links itself. And then, you can follow me on Twitter at Connor Newcomb _ as well, where I'll, promote some Orioles stuff and do some Orioles content and sports content there as well.
And yeah, I was checking out the Twitter podcast, and actually also like that, he has some old clips, just from the late '90s. Just I was, I remember this, like Bobby Bonilla and there's players you forgot that used to be with the Orioles, like Eric Davis crushing a home run in Detroit. So you also, just show some old clips of some players that, maybe just don't remember or just kind of forget, maybe because they weren't like a super duper star, but, just, you just show some, some clips made that like 10, 15, sometimes 20 years old.
Yeah, you mentioned Eric Davis. I put that one out today. I think a lot of people kind of forget that he had those 2 years in Baltimore in the late '90s, and he was with the Orioles when he got his colon cancer diagnosis. Near the end of his career, and missed most of that '97 season when the Orioles won the division, and actually was able to come back right at the end and hit a big home run in the playoffs. And then he was really the best hitter on the '98 Orioles team that should have been good, was coming off back-to-back division titles and just fell apart and started, its run of 15 straight losing seasons. He was really the crown jewel of that '98 Orioles team, which was really his last really good year in the big leagues. And so I just saw that on YouTube earlier today, and just kind of felt for Eric Davis, because he came back from so much, that cancer diagnosis, just for, when he was finally back, the Orioles just fell apart that first year. But yeah, it's cool to go back in the mid to late '90s, right before the Orioles franchise kind of became the doormat of the American League for a while. They were some pretty good teams in the '90s.
No, I remember that. I mean, there was a good run there, I would say, from like '96, again, '97, '98, like the Orioles, Yankees. It was, those really two good teams. A lot of big name players on both sides. And you had that situation where Benitez, remember, threw a pitch and hit Tino Martinez in the back after a home run. It was a Ben McLean brawl, but there was a good 3 or 4 year run there. And then, like I said, it just seemed like for some reason, I don't know if they're looking to change philosophies or whatever, but they just like, again, just had a kind of a rough patch years until almost Showalter came in 2011 to kind of turned it around again for the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, they hired Davey Johnson as their manager in '96. All he did was take them to the ALCS in '96, win the division in '97, take them back to the ALCS. And Orioles management, for some reason, did not renew his contract after that. And so after those 2 incredible seasons, they decided to go away from Davey Johnson, and that kind of started the downfall. And they had a lot of free agents that year as well that they decided not to bring back. And they kind of left the last couple years of Musina and the last couple of years of Cal Ripken on that team to just see that team win, 70 games a year. And kind of started that downturn. And obviously, great matchups between the Orioles and Yankees. You even had a postseason series between them with the Jeffrey Meyer catch out in right field as well. But they had a couple good years, and it was nice to see, 15 years later, the Orioles finally get back to being good and start to battle with the Yankees again. But it's always thinking back to how good those teams were and thinking, what did we miss out on if they tried to build around, the last final years of Cal and build a better rotation around Musina. They should have been able to win for more than 2 years.
Yeah, and just going back to Eric Davis real quickly, as an opposing fan, whatever. I mean, he would scare me the most, just that swing. And I think like he's the only player that could do that type of swing. It was so unorthodox and violent. And it's funny enough, him and Darryl Strawberry pretty much grew up together in Los Angeles. And just around the same time, Darryl was with the '98 Yankees, and he couldn't finish the year because he had a colon cancer issue. Luckily he overcame it, but it's just kind of strange. Two types of players came up together, more or less, made it to the majors, and then they kind of get the colon issue just around the same time, give or take a year.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but I kind of tweeted that out today too, because of course the Orioles' best player on their roster right now, Trey Mancini, had his colon cancer diagnosis last year and missed that whole season, and he's back and healthy and in spring training. And it was kind of a somewhat of a clip to show like, hey, this happened to Eric Davis. He came back. He had the best season of his career coming of it, and obviously everyone hoping that Mancini can kind of do the same thing.
And some other interesting notes, maybe didn't make big headline news, but King Felix invite him as a non-roster invitee. Again, struggled a little bit in the last few years in Seattle, sat out last year because of the whole coronavirus thing. And also a name that a lot of New York fans should be familiar with, Matt Harvey, He also signs a minor league deal, so he might be in the running to possibly break the rotation. Just what were your thought? What are your thoughts on those two pitchers?
Yeah, it's funny because we kind of knew as people who cover this team and as Orioles fans that but by the time we got to January of this offseason, it was pretty much known that the Orioles weren't going to spend a lot of money for pretty much anybody. They were really going the other way. They were cost cutting, and so we knew if there were going to be any big names that were coming in, it was going to be guys that were on the back half of their career for cheaper deals. And so, it's funny to see Felix Hernandez. As you said, he did sign with the Braves last year and just didn't pitch, decided to opt out of the season. So, everyone knows about his Mariners career, 15 years in Seattle. And it's just crazy to think about, from someone who grew up watching Felix at his best, that, the first pitch he'll throw in a non-Mariner uniform is most likely going to be with the Orioles. He's most likely going to be in the rotation to start the season. And it was kind of a, wow, we got Felix Hernandez. He's still trying to put together potentially a Hall of Fame resume and try and reverse what happened the last couple of years. But then all you have to do is pull up the Baseball Reference page and see what's happened over the last 3 seasons he's pitched and know that he's not anything close to the old Felix Hernandez. But between him and Matt Harvey, it's two guys who, 6-7 years ago were two of the best pitchers in baseball. And really over the past 2 years have been two of the worst pitchers in baseball. So for the Orioles, it's kind of like, can they find a middle ground? Can both of them get back to being league average, maybe a little bit better than league average starting pitchers, and be veterans for the tons of young arms the Orioles have, and at least be like, I know what success is like in this league, and at the very least help out those younger guys.
Yeah. And I think, it's going back with the Yankees with CC, that kind of had a similar situation with Sabathia. Like, he had a little, run there, I'll say from like 2013 to maybe almost 2016, where like kind of same way as King Felix, he wasn't like that ace type pitcher anymore, lost some velocity, was having some injury issues, but was able to sort of change his pitching rotation, being more of like a technical nibbler type of pitcher. So, perhaps King Felix could do something similar. And again, be more of a nibbler, be a little more crafty and find success that way.
Yeah, Felix said, he knows he doesn't have the stuff that he used to have. And he actually talked to the media for the first time last week in an Oriole uniform. And they asked him, why sign with the Orioles? Why not go back to Seattle? Why not try to get on with a contender? And he basically said, like, look, I'm trying to put together a Hall of Fame resume. Like, he's trying to get to 300 wins and he's trying to get to a certain number of strikeouts. And he felt like, coming to the Orioles, that would give him a chance to pitch at the majors would be his best shot at that. And, he's not going to be the Cy Young winner, but, as you said, like CC, could he at least change his game enough where he knows what he is now, in his mid 30s, and he can at least be a major league average guy. And if you have Felix Hernandez, that's the other thing. People are going to tune in to watch Felix Hernandez. And, if there's fans back in the stadium, fans are going to show up to see Felix Hernandez versus a, random waiver claim that the Orioles may make for a guy whose skill set at this point might be somewhat similar to Felix's, but not the same name recognition.
No, I totally agree there, because even in Seattle, he kind of had a little following. They would have like the people put up like the king signs and have a bunch of crowns. And so it's just something like the fans could kind of get involved in. Again, if hopefully at some point we get back this season, some limited capacity. And of course, another name that's been with Baltimore for a while, and of course, some fans, similar how we had A-Rod and we still like trash on A-Rod. A lot of fans not really too happy with Chris Davis. Again, signs a big contract, had the whole PED thing, and then kind of been struggling the past couple of seasons. And again, just it seems like a lot of fans kind of focus some of their anger on him.
Yeah, it was 7 years, 161 million that he signed after the 2015 season. So 2 years left on the deal this year and next year. The thought is, from most people, really there was a question, would they just cut him loose after last year? Because he has really become the worst hitter in Major League Baseball. I mean, there's probably not a hitter that will consistently be on a Major League team that I would rank below Chris Davis on, having confidence in him getting a hit right now in a Major League game. And I mean, what a fall it is for a guy who finished, third, I believe, in MVP voting in 2013 and, got MVP votes in 2015 in his contract year. And now he is the worst hitter in baseball. And really the thought is, the Orioles, they've expanded the rosters to 26 men now. the mantra among Orioles fans is the Orioles are still playing with a 25-man roster because Chris Davis is going to be on it. He's not going to start many games because the Orioles have better options at first base and DH. And so he's just sitting there. He's getting paid. He'll probably be cut loose at the end of this season and won't play out that final year next year. But it's tough to watch because it's not even like an A-Rod thing where, I know he struggled and he was getting benched at the end of that contract. Even when the Yankees were, in playoff games, I remember near the end of that contract, he was getting benched in certain games. It's not even like that where you can, count on a home run every couple of games. You can count on maybe a big double in a 1-for-5 night. Like he just can't hit the ball. And it's weighing kind of the whole organization down really at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad thing in a way, but like it's just, and especially against lefties. I mean, we all know lefty on lefties on a tough matchup, but like it just seems like he's just an automatic strikeout. It's just like how did things break down like that? And he's not like an old guy; he's like 34, 35. So it's just weird again like an MVP type caliber player kind of fell from grace in that way.
Yeah, and he talks every offseason. He actually, since he's kind of gone on this really downward trajectory, it kind of started in the 2018 season, was really the first year where he looked a lot different than he had before. And 18 was bad, 19 was worse, and 2020 he barely played. And every offseason, you'll have one day of Chris Davis with the media, and it's basically just 30 minutes of the media just basically being like, Chris, what have you changed? Can this change? And that day was actually, I believe, Thursday of this week. And he just said, he had dropped a few pounds after he had put on 30 pounds before last season. That didn't work. So he cut some of that weight. He said his stance is completely different, but he wouldn't tell them how it's different. He said, wait and see for the first spring training game. And so he's trying to make changes still, but it's just, it is tough to watch because of how good he was before he signed that contract with the Orioles and how much he helped them when they were a winning team. And now, the situation would obviously be different if the Orioles were competing right now. They would have cut him loose by now because he's dead weight. But when you're almost actively trying to lose like the Orioles were the last couple of years, Davis kind of helps you do that. And so that's why he's kind of still on the roster. But it's at the point, and as you said, like I wouldn't be surprised if he barely faces a lefty at all season, even if he is on the roster the whole year. And it's just really tough to watch for everybody involved at this point.
And it's going up to the ownership with Peter Angelos. Obviously, he's getting up there in age. I mean, is he active with the team, or is it more of his son kind of the front man? Like, how's like the power structure, at least from the front office point of view?
Yeah, pretty much at this point, his sons have taken over. I mean, obviously, he's still get his name still at the top as the owner of the Orioles, but his sons are there, kind of pulling the strings at this point, and obviously, they're playing a big part in the cost cutting that has been going on for the last 2 years with the Orioles. And we'll see how that affects the team moving forward. They obviously have a lot of trust in Mike Elias, the Orioles' new GM, now in what will be his third season as GM this year. They have a lot of trust in him and his plan and what he was able to do as assistant GM with the Astros, which was kind of the same thing. The Astros were the worst team in baseball for 3 or 4 years. I mean, 100+ losses until, those young guys, Correa and Altuve and all those guys in Springer got to the big leagues, and it flipped like that. And, they trust in him. But I think the big question from Orioles fans now is, once the Orioles get back, if the plan does work out, and in a couple of years here, these young players work out and they are back to contending in a very tough division because the Yankees aren't going anywhere. And we know what the Rays are going to be every year, and the Red Sox are going to spend their way back. And now the Blue Jays look good again. In a couple of years, when these young players get back, will they still be trying to cut costs, or will they be willing to spend on some free agents to add to the team? And I think that's kind of the big question we have now, is that with his sons now kind of in charge, will it be different enough where they'll be willing to maybe spend a little bit more? And that's kind of yet to be seen.
Yeah, because just getting back how we started, like in the '90s, they had a lot of big money free agent guys. David Wells, Bobby Bonilla, B.J. Surhoff, Jimmy Key. They bought in. It was kind of the end of the career. So like they did spend money. Roberto Alomar. So they had great players. They spent money. It just seems like they got away from that for some reason. Maybe they're trying to do different philosophy. And even though they had that good run between 2011 up to 2016, had good teams, but no one, they never really bought any big name players. They just kind of like had a good, mostly homegrown unit and it's kind of brought on some pieces, but never really willing to really open the bank account and like really, all right, let's go for this.
Yeah, that stretch you talked about in the 90s, obviously, they were willing to bring in so many guys. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about Bobby Bonilla, you're going to have to spend some money because he's still making money from the Mets,
Yeah.
obviously. But you bring in guys like that, and with Alomar, and for the Orioles, in that later stretch you talked about, in the 2010s, they were willing to spend on their own guys. So they, extended Adam Jones. They obviously extended Chris Davis. They extended guys like JJ Hardy. They were willing to spend the money on their own guys, but what they weren't willing to do was bring in that outside free agent. I don't know if it was, scared to bring in guys who they hadn't had in-house for years. And obviously they were getting a little better discounts on guys like Jones and Hardy when they were signing them a little earlier. But, they were never willing to do that. And the big thing that hurt them, the big one that Orioles fans talk about the most is, they brought in Nelson Cruz before that 2014 season on an $8 million deal for 1 year after he had been hit with the PED suspension and kind of no one wanted to touch him. The Orioles took a chance. He led the league in homers, helped them win a division, and they didn't want to shell out the money to re-sign him to a long-term deal. And here we are 7 years later, and Cruz is still one of the best, hitters in baseball at age 40. And, the Orioles said, oh, we're worried about his age. He's 34. He might not hit like this anymore.
What excites you about this season coming in? Are there particular players you want to keep an eye on, or is there any other areas where just or just in general that hey, we get sort of getting back to normal, and even if the team's not good, it's just still get back into a full baseball season.
Yeah, last year was interestingly fun because the Orioles kind of started off hot last year, and in that 60 game season, that matters a little more because then they were technically in the playoff race for 35 of those 60 games, 40 of those 60 games, so it felt good. Last year, kind of seeing those young guys come together, and for this year, obviously the top thing is seeing Trey Mancini get back, coming back from having colon cancer. And if he is back to what he was in 2019, which was really an all-star snub that year, if he's back to that level, it's just going to be such a great story. But beyond him, the Orioles called up Ryan Mountcastle last year, and he had a really good, strong 30 games to end the season. And, I think he's going to be one of the favorites for AL Rookie of the Year this year. He's going to be playing left field for the Orioles. He's a pretty similar player to Trey Mancini. But he's probably he's a better runner, and he might even be a better hitter. The Orioles think he might be down the line, and so they're pretty excited to put him in the middle of the lineup. And then as far as pitching goes, John Means had a really strong finish to his season. Of course, he was an all-star 2 years ago. He'll be the opening day starter, and the Orioles have brought up a lot of young pitchers, including a guy in Dean Kramer, who had his debut against the Yankees last year. He made 2 really, really good starts against the Yankees last season. And we're excited about seeing him. He'll probably be the number 3 guy in the rotation this year. And so the cost cutting sucks. And, there's a lot of question marks. But the one thing it does for the Orioles this year is it leaves a lot of open places for these prospects to come up and show what they can do.
What were your feelings on Machado? You think they should have kept him just to have their star, or it was the right thing to do to just let him walk?
Yeah, it's kind of like once they got to where they got with Machado, they had to trade him. Once they came to probably around 2016, which was that kind of that last year they competed, he, was signed through 2018 on his rookie deal. Once they got there and there still hadn't been an extension, and you could kind of see the wheels turning towards the Orioles kind of, going the other way a little bit, you could tell at that point that the right thing to do was to trade him. In return for him, I mentioned Dean Kramer. He was one of the players they got from the Dodgers. He looks to be a pretty good starting pitcher. They got an outfielder, Yusniel Diaz, who's going to compete for an outfield spot this year and is a top 10 prospect for the Orioles. And they got a couple other players who we'll probably see at the major league level this year as well. So, this season will be big in kind of showing how the Orioles did in that Machado trade, because we might see all 4 players in the majors. But obviously I would have liked the Orioles to have been able to get a deal done with Machado.
I'm a huge Mike Mussina fan. Even before he got into the Hall of Fame, I was saying he deserves it. He has enough, credentials just because, pitching in a bit of a different era compared to, 30 years ago in terms of, all the 300 wins and stuff like that. But obviously he goes in the Hall of Fame and chooses that kind of the generic Hall of Fame hat, not a Yankee, not an Oriole. Now, I would have been okay if he chose the Orioles because, again, he probably had his maybe physically better and statistically better years, but kind of went in with the Manila hat of this Hall of Fame. Do you think he should have made a choice on that? Did you have a preference or a team, Yankees, Orioles? You think he should have picked, or are you okay the way he did it?
I will say I'm happy he didn't go in with a Yankee cap. I think if he would have picked one, obviously it should have been, at least from my biased viewpoint as well, should have been an Oriole cap, just because you look at his stats, he was a little. Now it wasn't a huge discrepancy because he obviously had some good years in New York as well, but he did have better numbers overall with the Orioles. He obviously was on a couple more winning teams with the Yankees, but I do think if he would have won a World Series with New York, he might have gone in with that Yankee cap. And I think, with him, what did he retire the year before they won
Yeah, so
in
he retired.
2009?
Yeah, he tied it 2008, and that's actually the one year he won 20 games. It's crazy enough. So it was weird. Like he almost had two careers. He had a career with the Orioles, of course, with the Yankees. Started off hot. Then he had like 3 or 4 years where he had like groin issues and hamstring issues, and kind of same like CC and same like hopefully King Felix had to change his way of going about it, and then kind of resurrected his career a little bit in 07, 08. But yeah, but I agree. I think he should have went with the Orioles hat. I would have been okay with it. But I do see a point. If he did win a championship, then that might have tilted the scale to Yankee land.
Yeah, and the one thing I think the reason this is more of an Oriole centric thing, but the other reason I think he should go in as an Oriole is the Yankees have had so many great arms in the past 20 years, and obviously you've talked about CC, he's one of them. Andy Pettitte, obviously a guy who's trying to get himself into the Hall of Fame. For Orioles starting pitchers, there's been no one since Jim Palmer retired in 1984. There has been no one who has come close to what Mike Mussina did in an Oriole uniform. And that's kind of the argument for him going in as an Oriole is, the stats might have been only a little bit better than with the Yankees, but what he meant as an Oriole starting pitcher, you think back the last 30 years, you're not going to find a starting pitcher that had numbers anywhere close to what Mussina did with the O's. And when you have to compare everyone to him, you really feel like the Orioles really haven't had a true ace since Mussina signed with the Yankees.
Connor Newcomb, again, people can listen to you, follow you, Locked on Orioles, follow you on Twitter. And let's just, go into the season. Hopefully Trey Mancini comes back strong. I can't root for you too hard because, I got to keep you, I got to keep the Orioles down a little bit, but but hopefully some of those, young players come together and maybe, 2 or 3 years from now, we have some, fierce, nasty rivalries against each other.
Yeah, that's the hope. It was fun in the 90s, and it was obviously fun in the 2010s. Kind of before the Yankees got a little bit older and kind of rebuilt it. But when those two teams were battling it out for the division, like in 2012, I mean, that's fun for me. And to be honest, and you'll probably agree with this, I enjoy it when the Red Sox are kind of going through it and winning 70 games, and it's the Orioles and the Yankees battling it out at the top of the division. That's what I'd like to see.
I'll take it to him. Plus, Baltimore's a little warmer than Boston, so I like that drive better.
Yeah.